No students in the Zoom.
No, he was front two on this side.
Okay.
Was two on that side. All three.
So thank you all for joining us. We do have some coffee, cookies, such like, some water, if you're not as excited by coffee as I am. My name is Craig McCashin. I'm the director of the Academic Honors Program, and I'm very, very excited to introduce one of our graduating honors students this fall. At least that's the plan. Logan Buck. Hey, I always have to inject a little bit of uncertainty, but you should be fun by it. Logan is a senior biology major, but for one of his honors projects, he has opted to do something in the realm of video games, art, and visual media and such like. I think under your guidance, Dr. Morton's guidance. So we're going to turn it over to Logan. He has, I believe, 184 slides that he wants to get through, but he will, and at the end, we'll have some time for questions. Take it away, sir.
All right, it's not 100.
I know.
Close enough, you know? Okay, let's see if it's working. Nope, it's not going. That's fine. All right, I'm Logan. I'm going to be presenting on the art of video games. Start off with, this is what video games used to look like. If you're over the age of 30, you should know what a CRT TV is.
Yeah.
But the rest of us, LCD.
Wow.
Then you've got things, joysticks, and the original Atari. These are original ads. They would have an 8-bit microprocessor. Now, by themselves, things would represent big milestones of technological achievement. But together, they make video games, which is a universe inside a pixelated screen that is constantly evolving through human innovation. So to see how far video games have come, I'm going to compare original ones, Pong. You'd need this whole machine to be able to display this screen. But now there are games that look like this. This is Red Dead Redemption 2. Same game, it looks really good in my opinion. You get games like this. This is Abzu. You get to explore underwater world. And then you've got Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Given the recent success of video game adapted movies, we could see that video games are clearly at the forefront of pop culture. And given the popularity of them, there's now debate over whether video games can be considered art. As you can see, we've got the Super Mario Bros. Movie, it was very successful. And then the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, which was also very successful. Now, to explore how video games are an art form, we need to do 4 things. We need to define what a video game is, define art, and then explore the components of video games, and then look at them in action. So to start off with, what is a video game? There are 4 main components of video games, and that is algorithm, player activity, interface, and graphics. I have short definitions here. Algorithm is just whatever represents the rules and randomness of the game. Player activity is however the player engages with the digital space. There's interface, which is anything between the player and the video game. So that's a controller, screen, and then on-screen components such as cursors. And then graphics, which is a changing and changeable visual display on screen that is pixel-based, that is under the control by the player. Now, this sounds very confusing, so I'm going to give an example. Can anybody identify one of the 4 components in Atari, in Tetris on the Game Boy?
I can identify the interface.
Okay, what is that?
Would it not be the buttons and the feedback and such?
Yeah. Well,
I'll go with algorithm. That's determining the randomness of the pieces that you have to deal with.
yeah,
Player activity, the person actively dropping the blocks.
yeah. And then graphics, obviously, it's what you're looking at. So there's the answer. Yeah. Algorithms score what blocks are being shown, the rules of the game, the goal of the game. Player activity is just pushing the buttons. Interface is the console itself, the digital display and the buttons, and then the graphics are what you're looking at. Now in 2022, there were about 12,681 games released on Steam, which is a very popular video game distribution service. That's about 35 a day. Now, they normally fit into 2 categories. There are AAA games, which are made by these big game studios, typically have teams in the hundreds. And then you've got indie games, which are made by either one developer or a small team. Any combination of those previous 4 elements can make a video game. And as you can see, the possibilities are endless. Now, given the fact that video games are now reshaping the landscape of interactive entertainment, people have questioned the validity of them as art. So to understand that, we need to figure out what art is. Now, I have a broad definition here. It's the conscious use of the imagination and the production of objects intended to be contemplated or appreciated as beautiful, as in the arrangement of forms, sounds, or work. These are 4 very solid examples. This is the Lascaux cave drawings in France. I don't know when they were made, but it was way back in the day. You've got Greek pottery, a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, and then Casablanca, which was a movie in 1942. Now, given that these all are very different forms, but fit under the definition of art, you would think that video games would fit under that definition, but that's a hard sell. The first major critic of video games was Roger Ebert. He was a very well-respected film critic, film historian, and film journalist. And he released a blog. As you can see, he has a very respectful interpretation of what his audience is. And in his blog, he said, no video gamer now living will survive long enough to experience the medium as an art form. That was what he declared. The center of his argument is that the inherent interactivity and goal-oriented mechanics of video games will detract from any emotional resonance that you could get from it. And to paraphrase, he said, Michael Jordan and Bobby Fischer never considered whether their game was art. Why should we consider video games? Obviously, this sparked the debate on it. Now, at the time, video games are already well respected as an art. You should know the BAFTA, the British Academy of Film and Television Arts. In 2004, they released a branch off called the BAFTA Game Awards, which recognizes outstanding creative achievement in the video game industry. There's a lot of categories such as narrative, artistic achievement, but the most prestigious is the BAFTA Fellowship Award, which is not exclusive to video games. It's presented in recognition of, quote, outstanding achievement in the art forms of the moving image. So as you can see, you've got these three, lesser known people in film, and they've all won this award for prestigiousness in the field. And then you have three people who have worked on video games. One of them is Nolan Buswell. He's the one who worked on the Atari and made Pong. There's Shigeru Miyamoto. He's the guy who made The Legend of Zelda and the Mario games. And then Hideo Kojima. He's known for a game series called Metal Gear Solid. And he also worked on a recent game called Death Stranding. Also, the Smithsonian had an exhibit called The Art of Video Games. And to quote directly from them, they say, video games are a prevalent and increasingly expressive medium within modern society. In the 40 years since the introduction of the first home video game, the field has attracted exceptional artistic talent, an amalgam of traditional art forms. And then he gives a couple examples. Video games offer artists a previously unprecedented method of communicating with and engaging audiences. The question is, why is there a debate then? If it's very obvious that video games are an art form, I say it's the gatekeeping of new art forms and technology is a formula that never dies. There's Charlie Chaplin who thought that film would die out and it's just a fad compared to theater. There were pop artists who think rap and hip hop isn't real music. Everyone always has resistance when technology advances beyond its predecessors. Video games are now deliver very powerful art experiences, just like movies, but now there's interactivity. To explore this, we have to analyze what these parts look like. So first of all, you've got 3D digital worlds. Games such as Dark Souls will create these big fictional worlds, but there's also games such as Assassin's Creed Unity that model real world locations. First one is Dark Souls. This is a location in Orlando. This is the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris compared to how it was recreated in Assassin's Creed Unity. Can anybody tell me which one of these pictures is the real one? I'll give you a hint. It's the one on the right because there's the things that you could crawl on as your character, which isn't in the original. Also, soundtrack plays a big part of these games. I'll see if it'll play. I don't know if it'll play it for me. There we go. Everybody knows this song. The audio quality is really bad, but you get the idea. Everyone knows this music. It's very iconic. And games like Dark Souls utilize the soundtrack as part of the experience. It has 31 tracks that are composed by Motoi Sakuraba. To give an example, I'm exploring how music is used in Dark Souls. Mainly it's played in boss themes. There's 3 locations where music isn't played or is played ambiently. But for now, we're going to focus on the bosses. So you've got, as it's pretty obvious, I'm not majoring in music theory, so I don't know how to explain what I'm hearing. But if a boss you're facing is a great hero, then it has this like very powerful music. And then if you have bosses that are villains, it's very dark and low. So I'll give an example. These are 2 heroes. Okay, that's enough of that one. And then you've got bosses like this, which are villains. You get the idea. Now, video games have individual art pieces, but they are only part of the whole composition. The sum of a game is greater than its parts. There are teams of 3D modelers, composers, programmers, and developers that are making one coherent piece. Something being art is not a comment on the quality of the thing, but it's an objective characteristic. The graphics are visual art, soundtrack is musical art. There's a narrative that's similar to books and books and movies that are another form of art. If the fundamental pieces of a video game are different forms of art, then it would make sense that it is now an evolution into a different form of art, a separate category. So to analyze this, I'm going to focus specifically on art video games, which are just games that are designed to deliver something beyond entertainment. So there's 4 games I focus on. That's Dark Souls, Silent Hill 2, Spec Ops: The Line, and That Dragon Cancer. These hallmark entries show us the potential of art in video games and different components that are possible. Start off with Dark Souls. This one's a personal favorite of mine. This is an action role-playing game. It won Ultimate Game of All Time in 2021. And it's also considered one of the most influential games of all time. It actually spawned its own genre, which is referred to as Souls-like. Gameplay consists of the player traveling through sections of the world, fighting area bosses and enemies with items that they collect. Now, the premise, the lore is very complicated, and I'm not going to get into all of it, but this is just like the Cliff Notes version. Basically, in the beginning, the world has no form, it's ruled by dragons, and then fire appears, which brings duality, which is like light, dark, life and death, and then souls. These souls are used to conquer powerful dragons. And then as time passes, that fire begins to fade. And when the fire begins to fade, the world begins to crumble. There's a prophecy that a chosen undead will one day show up, slay powerful creatures, and then become a powerful soul, and then sacrifice himself to extend the fire. That's what the player is. And I provide a definition player character because I'm going to use that a lot. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's just the character that's being controlled by the player. Now, in the world, they use 2 mechanisms of art, and that's minimalist storytelling and environmental. Minimalist storytelling is telling a story not directed, so it's not given through cutscenes, it's given through item descriptions. And then it also uses environmental storytelling. So when you read item descriptions, you hear about this great, wonderful world, but when you look around, there's nothing left. It's all rubble. And that's environmental storytelling. You don't need to be told directly that the world is falling apart because you could see it. These are 3 examples of what the world looks like. I included this picture just because I thought it was funny, because this guy has no health and the boss is full health. He's about to get destroyed. I just think that's hilarious. Now, Dark Souls takes inspiration from a lot of different things, but I focus on existentialism and philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche. Existentialism is just a philosophy that emphasizes isolation in an indifferent and cruel world. The philosophy manifests through a game mechanic known as hollowing. Now, I have an item description that describes what that is. Basically, to summarize what hollowing is, it's when a person loses motivation to continue, they go insane and become hollow. Now, hollow is just a shell of a person. It establishes that hollowing happens to everyone, and even gods can escape. And that leads us to the best example of hollowing. When you hear of Gwyn in the lore, when you read item descriptions, you hear of this great, powerful leader that's very terrifying and was able to conquer the dragon with all his might. But when you encounter him as the final boss, he's gone hollow. He's lost the motivation to continue because he's afraid of the fire dying out. Unlike other boss themes, like you heard earlier, they're very exciting, they're very scary. His is the saddest that you hear. Also, a fun fact is it's played on piano and only the white keys are used because he's afraid of the dark. This is the place leading up to his arena. When you hear about it, it sounds like this great throne room. In reality, it's falling apart. And this is what he looks like when you encounter him. Now, hollowing is established as something that's going to happen whether you like it or not. But there are 2 characters that aren't hollow. Now, there's many characters that aren't hollow. But these are the best examples that show that having meaning in your life avoids hollowing. The first one is Solaire. He's found purpose in helping others and through admiring the sun. So you can see the sun logos on him. And then there's Patches. He's this gremlin. He's awful. He kicks you into a pit when you first meet him. He's found meaning in tormenting other people. In the story, we're supposed to question what our purpose is. I mean, why are we trying to extend this flame? What's the point if things are going to fall apart eventually anyways? And one of the sources, Podgorski, describes it as a semi-system affair, which, if you don't know, Sisyphus is the mythological figure that pushes a boulder up a hill for all of eternity. You could read that. It's very long, very long-winded, but basically it builds its depiction of difficulty of maintaining motivation and hence sanity and consciousness, and its universe through the sustained indifference of its reality. The world is asking, what does it mean to have motivation? What does it mean to live? And this echoes existentialist philosophy that questions the authenticity of your life. To be authentic is to be aware of the limitations of your body and your existence and have freedom in that. To be inauthentic is to lose sight of the self and continue living as a role. That concept is directly modeled in hollowing. Characters and mechanics make it clear that by finding meaning in your life, you avoid the process of hollowing. A lot of people equate the hollowing mechanic with a cycle of depression. There's characters that encourage you to continue going, saying things like, don't you dare go hollow. The ultimate message of the game is that we should have perseverance in the face of hopelessness. It's telling the player to find meaning and to keep going, even when it's difficult, both in this world and in ours. Next is Silent Hill 2. This one's a very morbid game. It's a survival horror game. It's cited as one of the greatest horror games ever made, and an example of video games as an art form. It was praised for its story, its use of symbolism, and its handling of taboo subjects. The game consists of you controlling a character named James as he fights enemies, solves puzzles, and meets other characters. You play as James Sunderland. He's a man who travels to Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his dead wife. When he arrives, he realizes it's not a happy town and that he must fight horrifying enemies and avoid the pursuit of Pyramid Head, which is this big giant monster. And in the town, the soul and mind of characters are revealed through what they encounter. I'll go into that later. There are two main characters that James interacts with, and that's Angela and Eddie. They're both teen runaways. As it progresses, it becomes clear that everyone who comes to Silent Hill is there for some dark reason, and even James is there for some dark reason. In Angela's story, the developers use monsters and environments as symbols. So we see Angela gets attacked in a room by that monster right there, and she refers to it as her father. The room is also covered in newspaper clippings detailing this murder. She reveals that she was abused by him when she was younger, and that she murdered him in self-defense, and for some reason murdered her brother also. The monster is a manifestation of childhood trauma, and the room that she's in represents how suffocating the media attention surrounding the case is. Eddie, on the other hand, uses environmental symbolism. He's revealed to be a victim of bullying, and the room that he's in is a freezing cold meat locker, just surrounded by corpses. And it's later revealed that he shot his bully and the dog for some reason. The dog didn't do anything, but he was just being a bully. And where he was previously scared and self-conscious, he's now detached from reality and remorseless. The meat locker is symbolic of his lack of remorse and his cold indifference to death. The game handles three tough subjects in a very abstract manner. Both Angela and Eddie suffered from trauma and lashed out at their aggressors. However, the way they react is different. Angela feels guilt for what she did and tells the player, I deserved what happened, in her final interaction. She's in a burning staircase between the corpses of her father and her brother, and she eventually ascends the staircase, punishing herself for her guilt. Apologize for the quality. It was an old game, guys.
You see it too. For me, it's always like this.
This is what the staircase looks like in the final scene. Eddie, on the other hand, feels no guilt for what he does and claims that he'll do it again to anybody who makes fun of him. Angela was defending herself from further abuse, but Eddie confronted his abuser and was aggressive in that situation. Angela feels guilt, he feels none, and actually engaged in abusing other people out of malice. So this game is exploring guilt, shame, and trauma through characters in opposing situations. Now, monsters are also symbolic of different things. James runs into a couple monsters throughout the game, but these are the main ones. There's we know from earlier that Angela's monster was her father. For him, there's nurses in skimpy outfits. This reflects how he felt about his wife because he saw her in hospital settings a lot. There's also these creatures called lying figures. They look like hospital patients, but they arrive in agony. This is symbolic of the memory of his sick wife and the suffering that he feels. Now, in the final twist of the game, it's revealed what is Pyramid Head, this big, scary, terrifying monster. It's revealed that his wife did not die of a terminal illness. He killed her. When that's, he has to confront the truth, and it's revealed what he did. He reveals that this monster was made by him to represent the guilt that he feels that always follows him and his desire to receive punishment. Now, the game has three endings. Well, it has a lot of endings, but I focus on the main three because the other ones are more abstract. There's the default ending. This one is just if you don't meet the requirements for the other two. And this one, he just leaves Silent Hill and you don't really know what happens. Ending 2 is the bad ending. If you interact with a knife, if you listen to a lot of stuff about Mary, which was his wife, and if you take a lot of damage throughout the game and you don't heal yourself, then you get the bad ending. And this one, he crashes his car into the lake. In ending 3, there's this character we meet named Maria. If you protect her from enemies, lead her to objectives, and you take care of her when she's sick, then you get this good ending, which you leave Silent Hill with Maria. This is an example of interactive storytelling. The player is directly interacting with these characters, and how the player interacts with the world of Silent Hill changes the meaning of the game and the message. They deliberately add this because it allows the player to be a part of the story. Whether James murders Mary out of mercy or selfishness is up to how the player interacted with the world. While a movie or a book would have a singular, unchanging narrative, video games can have dynamic narratives that change. What makes it different from other art forms is the player activity. Now, in both of these games, they use environmental art. In Silent Hill, it's just this big, awful, foggy town, and it uses what's called liminal spaces. A definition of a liminal space is relating to or being an intermediate state, phase, or condition. So examples can be physical, like a hallway, emotional, like a divorce, or metaphorical, like a decision. Aside from a couple characters that you run into and monsters, it's empty and full of fog. While the effect is supposed to be scary because it's a horror game, it gets a little beyond that. There's a quote, Silent Hill 2 offers us one man's projection of an indeterminate state. Our protagonist is riddled with guilt and denial. The town is guilt manifest. And basically he explains how in 1 minute you might realize, well, it feels really realistic, but then in the other you see, well, this is very, gross looking PS2 graphics. And that feels deliberate. This intermediate state that James feels is a cacophony of guilt, denial, trauma, and pain, and that reflects in the world that you're actually seeing. The art is explored by the player-controlled character at their own pace, and they experience it as if they're inhabiting that space. The magic of many of Silent Hill's environments is how reasonable they are. The apartment buildings are not possible. There are countless real-world dark hallways full of locked doors. But by introducing an intensely personal horror and uncertainty to these spaces, Silent Hill 2 makes us suspicious of the same spaces in our own life. In the real world, if you go through a hallway in an apartment building and all the doors are locked, that's fairly normal. But in this world, it plays into the feeling of being lost and trapped. The use of digital space also contributes to the Dark Souls series. One example is Firelink Shrine. This is like the hub area that you go to. It's a place of safety and comfort, and the player rests here in between the gameplay of and the crumbling world. And this is what the music sounds like. Very calm, soothing. There's also locations like Ash Lake. According to the lore, this is what the world looked like before God's brought order to it. And it's an infinite void. And the location is meant to evoke the feeling of insignificance in the face of infinity. Or there's a word called the numinous, which describes the awe and dread of staring at a void. Weird. Now these locations, not only these two locations in Dark Souls, but also in Silent Hill, these locations are given meaning through the player interaction with the world, or the gameplay leading up to these sections. The effect is achievable because of the interactivity of these 3D environments. The player is experiencing the location and inhabiting it vicariously through the player character. Moving on to the third game, Spec Ops: The Line. This is a third-person shooter game. Gameplay is fairly simple. You just go from cover to cover and shoot enemies that you encounter. The story was inspired by Joseph Conrad's 1899 novel Heart of Darkness, which also inspired a 1979 film Apocalypse Now. Themes of the game include brutality of war, PTSD, and self-indulgent heroism. The premise is the player is a character named Captain Walker, who's part of the U.S. Army's Delta Force. His goal is to go into this hostile desert and save and extract survivors if they could find them. But as the game goes on and the desert wears on Walker's psyche, he's brought to question whether his actions are heroic or destructive. A quote from one of the developers is, "The game forces you to confront situations of startling personal horror and then offer the choice of how involved in that horror you want to be." There's also decisions that you can make in this game that will change the outcome of the story. In one section, his helicopter crashes and he has to search for his lost squad mates, but over the radio he hears them being attacked by civilians. When you get there, civilians attack you with sticks and rocks, and you have to decide whether you want to protect yourself using a gun against unarmed civilians or take that damage. The developer discussing this scene said, "To me, this is what the game is about. It's about putting you in a high pressure situation where you have to make a decision, and we're not going to tell you what the right answer is." Other video games often use loading screens to give you hints on how to play the game or how to do better. And this one, as the story goes on, they change as Walker's being, destroyed. One of them is, do you feel like a hero yet? They also use the game to criticize the use of chemical warfare. This is a short definition of what white phosphorus is. It's a powdery substance that's used in war. It sticks to people's skin and will burn down to the bone, sometimes even through bone. I included a comic at the top right that says, Geneva says we can't bomb civilians with napalm, and Death hands them one saying, here, try white phosphorus instead, it's a riot. The author or the artist of this added, not funny, well, neither is being burnt to the bone by US chemical weapons. Now, in the game, you actually get to use white phosphorus to clear a big roadblock of enemies. But instead of just using the weapon as you would in other games, you're then forced to confront the aftermath of the use of this weapon. I'm going to play a cutscene. If, content warning, just be afraid. I also want to point out the symbolism of 3 kids playing in the center. And then this is if you don't want to see charred bodies, look away.
Rub this on yourself. Wow.
Go and skip past. Basically, it's revealed that those are civilians that they attacked, not warriors or not soldiers. During playtesting, a lot of players set their controller down and walked away after this scene because of how impacted they felt by it. The producer on the game was very alarmed and said, that's good art. The question is, do we want to make a game that is art in that way? Another quote is, we use art to explore our emotions faithfully that we may not want to feel because something is actually happening in our lives. The developers took a very familiar game formula, a third-person shooter, and used it as a vehicle for art. They subvert expectations set in the genre by using realism, making the player acutely aware of the death and destruction that's caused by their player character. The players urged to question whether they should be treating war in a video game as entertainment. This is an example of the expectations that are set. This is an ad for Battlefield 4 that includes experience the brutality of war with 5 new classes. And then the other picture is Walker standing amongst bodies.
I'm not sure
Yeah.
Starship Troopers is meant to be a how-to.
The last game is called That Dragon Cancer. It is an exploration art game. It won Games for Impact and Most Innovative. It is an autobiographical game about the Green family's experience of raising their son Joel, who was diagnosed with terminal cancer at 12 months old. It is designed as an interactive monument to Joel's life. I want to say this game is very difficult, not gameplay wise, but content wise. They say it's a deeply personal memoir featuring audio taken from home videos. Can you find hope in the face of death? Now, why did they choose a video game to discuss this story? Ryan Green, the developer, says, we weren't sure how we wanted to share our experiences, but we knew we wanted to create something beautiful out of our pain, hope, and love. We thought about a film or an interactive art installation, but we settled on a video game because of the strengths of the medium of video games for telling a story that the viewer can be present in. Video games allow players to go at their own pace and fully engage with the narrative. A demo was made in 2013 that was previewed at Game Expos. One writer, after playing this game, wrote her own thoughts and feelings of her mother's death that this demo reminded her of. We will all meet this thing, or have already met it. Maybe that should be scary, but That Dragon Cancer is about sustaining the hope and joy of life for just as long as we can. Joel passed away in March of 2014, and then the focus of game development shifted to memorialize him in the movies. This is an example of a game. I had to look it up what this thing is called. This is a See and Say toy. In this section of the game, the player is trying to entertain Joel while his parents are waiting for the diagnosis. Eventually, the doctors come in, and then it switches to each character, and you get to hear what they're thinking in that moment. As the news hits the family, the room begins to fill with water. and because they feel like they are drowning. One of the hardest scenes is meant to be Joel's last night. What makes the game so impactful is that the audio that you're hearing is coming directly from home videos and recordings from the family. The last scene, Joel is at an altar and the room begins to fill with prayer. And the player is in control of these prayers. And it's implied that if you're successful, you might save Joel. However, at the end, all of the lights die and all that's left is Joel's light. And then eventually that goes out as well. The emotional resonance of the scene is because the player has been an active participant in the lives of Ryan, Amy, and Joel up to this point. The player participated in this journey of grief that led to this scene, and now they experience what the Green family has felt in these moments. The last scene is Joel in heaven eating pancakes. The player can blow bubbles and make him laugh, and the voice acting and laughing were from Joel before he passed. Reflecting on these moments, Sam Makovich comments, at its best, the game forces us to let go of Joel. Either this Joel who feels so alive in the game by way of so many beautiful moments, or another form of Joel in our own lives, without any guidance other than to check our own compass next to the family's own stories of happiness, pain, and confusion that we may relate to. That's the emotional heart of that dragon cancer that I will remember most vividly. The moments when the family's words and the game's immaculately rendered scenes fit together in ways that are less about logic and rationality and more about emotion and survival. The player gets to experience who Joel was as a person and interact with him directly and walk alongside Ryan and Amy in their story. In an article, That Dragon Cancer and How Digital Age Talks About Death, Cassandra Call reflects on a conversation that she had with Ryan Green shortly after Joel's passing and about how the memories of her father have faded away since she last remembered. Of all the things that death steals from us, it is perhaps the loss of the minutia that injures most. Year by year, time whittles at our recollection until there's only the shape of a person, weightless and insubstantial as a ghost. Digital media might not, at least for now, be able to supply olfactory input or convey the texture of a loved one's hand, but it can potentially help us to hold on to the other things and maybe make peace with our death when it comes. The game's discussion of faith was so powerful that Christian seminary schools began to use it for, quote, to reflect upon student reactions as an example of the potential usefulness of serious games in theological education. Jen Frank, Sam Makovich, and Cassandra Call all relate to loss in their own life because That Dragon Cancer speaks to the player on a personal level, reflecting on Joel's life and reflecting on death as part of the human experience. It is a grim reminder that one day all of us will have to experience death, but in the digital age, our impact can continue far after we are gone, and the story of Joel has already impacted so many people. Video games have been used to entertain, educate, frighten, and excite players all around the world, but That Dragon Cancer uses it in a way that few others have done, to memorialize the loss of a loved one. It displays the ability for video games to deliver unique art experiences that connect with the audience on an intimate and personal level, proving that the medium is a viable and powerful vehicle for artistic expression. This is one of the last panels that we came. To summarize my arguments, video games are an amalgamation of multiple different art forms. They can use player activity, game mechanics, and interactive storytelling to deliver unique narrative experiences involving the player in that message. They use digital environments mixed with gameplay to invite the player to inhabit the world with their player character and experience it vicariously. And the narrative of games are given more impact because the player is an active participant in the story. It could also be used to provide commentary on serious topics. Now, why do we play video games? I have a quote from the book about this. It would be easy to say that the Souls games are more than just video games, but in fact, just the opposite is true. They are 100% video games, as video games are in their current form. Interactive works that aim not to simply entertain players, but to provide a complete experience that revolves around a myriad of details, sensations, and emotions. To those who are receptive to it, the journey is unforgettable. The feeling will be much more lasting than a game that simply entertained. Two in my presentation. Some video games seek to touch the audience and leave a profound impact to be contemplated and appreciated as art. While not every painting, book, movie, or play make a difference, the ones that do leave an impact beyond the feeling of entertainment. There's no denying the impact that games have left in the world of visual media and the continued influence that they will have.
Very nice. Well done. So we have a bit of time where we can ask Logan to discuss. I will say I was pleased you included well, pleased is the wrong word, Dragon Cancer, because we actually had a presentation years ago. Remember Rain Johnson did one on that dragon cancer, I think probably back in like 2016 or so, when it was newish.
when it came out.
So it's nice to see kind of it brought back as well and inspire, I want to go and dust off some of my old games and start doing stuff. Dr. Sykes, you have a question on the Zoom. What you got?
I'm zooming from home. I'm recovering from illness, but I loved your presentation, Logan. It was so wonderful. No surprise. I do have a question. So you talked about all these different uses of games, which I agree with, but there's one that you didn't really mention, which is so in the one with the white phosphorus, it was like a anti-war theme, but there is the use of video games by governments, especially, and our government included, right, to get people into war and war games, and even to train people who do things like drones and stuff like that. Do you want to talk about sort of what maybe the darker side of this could be, as far as how our military is using it to recruit and things like that?
I could give one example, not particularly of recruitment, but how games have been used in war. They at some point in time, when they were first dropping drones, they would have to teach people in these courses how to use the controller because it was very complicated and specific. But then they just replaced it with an Xbox 360 controller, and they didn't have to train people because people were playing Halo and Call of Duty at home.
Right.
That is so wild.
Yeah. So it has been used as a recruitment tool and can be used for nefarious purposes. There are games that are made specifically to elicit negative reactions. There's one game I'm thinking of in particular, Hatred. It's a mass shooting game. Yeah, it's not very respectable at all. But like any other form of art, it can be used as a vehicle for awful means. It's just up to the artist to do what they want to do with it.
Thank you.
And yeah, Scott pointed out America's Army, as you just said, as a recruitment tool for the military. Yeah. Questions, thoughts? I mean, well, okay, Dr. Sykes.
I have one more. Sorry, I get excited about video games.
Kidding. What do you got?
So Logan, another thing that I was wondering is a lot of people are worried about, especially with Steam being like so dominant, and they remove games from their library, and people are worried about some of these games like disappearing. Do you have any thoughts about that?
People will find a way. There's pirates all over the internet. There's something called, I think it's freeware. Basically, after a certain period of time, the copyright runs out and people will just release games for free. It is scary to have certain companies have such dominance in the industry because they can influence trends or discourage other people from getting into the industry. But as a whole, given the prevalence of like indie developers, I think it's safe to say that it's still pretty free range right now.
Yeah, if you go to abandonware.com, they have a lot of games where copyright has run out. So
right.
You can also
Oh
buy
my gosh, that sounds good.
What's that, Laura?
I want that. I'm gonna go there.
Let's go to its website.
for it.
I'm sure there's no malware in it at all.
Use a VPN, use antivirus.
I'll test it out on my office computer.
Yeah, use your office computer. That's a good idea.
That's a
good
good
idea.
That'll go well for you.
Oh yeah.
Thank you, Logan.
There's also, if you have access to it, I think it's the video game archive out of Arizona. You have to have academic credentials to use, but they will send you like the old antique system in the mail, so that you don't have to play it on like a CD, like a ROM version, like a port version where you're using a keyboard and mouse. So if you're playing an Atari game, you get to play it on an Atari.
I love it.
And they've retrofit them so that they can work with TVs and stuff. But yeah, I think you have to pay for shipping because they have to send you a whole box of stuff. But yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, Chloe
so
points
neat.
out that they use virtual shooting ranges in at least in her experience in basic training. I think that's interesting, kind of replacing the range,
Wow.
the range.
When people come out with new technology in a free market, the government will always stick their hand in there and take what they can. So
No, government.
It just seems like that's gonna like abstract actual war for people, obviously, like,
it
you
could
know,
be simplified.
because it's not a game.
We'll always find a way to kill each other.
Yeah.
I would say I do know from my own experience in terms of the art question. I think it's interesting. I remember when I was in Rochester, and might have been before Laura got there. I don't remember. But I remember seeing at the International Medieval Congress that somebody was presenting a paper on the art of Elder Scrolls Oblivion. It was around the time Elder Scrolls Oblivion had come out, and about the medievalia of Oblivion, and sort of talking about the the inspirations and all that. And I was a young, and this might be surprising, obnoxious PhD student. And I probably, I was in history, I wasn't in English. And so I just kind of looked at it and I was like, really? This is what we're doing now. This is what our academics are. And now I think to myself, shit, I wish I had gone to that panel, because it would have been probably a lot more interesting than whichever one I went into.
When it comes to like academics, some games such as the Assassin's Creed games, obviously it's fictional history.
Yeah.
There weren't assassins running around, they're
Hey.
not like powerful, whatever. But they do have sections where you can explore the 3D world for education.
Yeah.
And they have people who have like history PhDs working on like in this section, there's a story about how Socrates actually might have been.
Yeah, I think they're using that Assassin's Creed reproduction of Notre Dame to try to rebuild Notre Dame after the fire, because they lost the roof. They have the vaulting still, but
I that's what I was hinting at there. Really, they just use the research material because they have so many pictures, videos, all kinds of stuff.
and it's all right. Any last questions, Dr. Morton?
I got one observation to show you. So my friend Matt Singer just wrote a book on Roger Ebert, and he found a picture of him and Gene Siskel playing like the first Nintendo at like a comic convention or something, and it was like Siskel and Ebert gamers. They posted that on Twitter the other day, and I was thinking of you. But the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, so I think you did a really great job of analyzing how like aesthetics in the game, the music, the level design, all of that contributed to certain themes. I have not played Dark Souls, but I've played the other Souls-like games. And I was curious to see what your thoughts were maybe about like how difficulty plays a role in like bringing out that theme of the Hallowed.
Yeah, so that's actually in the work or in my essay, I did comment on that. The fact that the game is so brutal and unforgiving in the gameplay, it plays into that theme of the world being cruel and brutal and unforgiving. And a lot of players give up and lose the message of the game, which is funny to players who've actually succeeded, because it's like, oh, that guy's hollow, or whatever. But I definitely think the difficulty of the game plays into that theme, and that's why that game is so well respected.
That's exactly what I was thinking, because when I got Demon Souls, I got it and I tried for like a year, and I was like, I get 30 minutes into this game and I die constantly. I'm not playing this game
I
anymore.
will confess, I installed and deleted Dark Souls like 4 or 5 times before I actually played it, because I'm like, okay, it's not that hard, I could do it. And then I start, and then I die repeatedly, and then I give up.
Right.
So it took a while, but like once you get it, it's easy sailing from there.
Any last questions or comments before we release Logan? All right. Well, nice job. Well, once again, thank you, and we'll give you another applause. Ubisoft Discovery Tour.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's what I was thinking of. Thank you.
All right. See you later, Zoomy Zoom folks.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.